Well, good morning. Good morning. Many of you have asked over the past several weeks if my family and I are settling in, if we are beginning to make Columbus our home, and I am pleased to report that we are. We are indeed. Every day we are going through boxes, and we are still in the process of throwing those things out that we don't need, finding a place for those things that we do need. And now, how many of you in this room have moved before? Have you moved? We have a bunch. Now, I don't know if your process of moving is similar to ours, but we started off with a very clear plan of attack. We were going to attack each room, and we were going to pack that room, and it was going to be organized, and we were going to label those boxes. And then, I don't know if your packing process is like ours, but you just want to get it done. Particularly at the end. I have boxes that we just started throwing stuff into. In our case, throwing junk into, just so that it could get on the van to make it to Columbus. I recently opened a box, and inside I discovered that it had pantyhose, a salt and pepper shaker, hedge clippers, and a football helmet. I promise you that I'm the one who probably packed that box right there. And what the point of the story is that if you are ever in need of help packing, I am probably not the one that you want to call upon. Several months ago when we came up for our covenant meeting, we had the joy of bringing the entire family. And so my kids, McGuire, which is 7, and Wright, that is 8, had an opportunity to explore the church. And so they went and they played in the gym and they checked out the playground. And I could see over the next couple of weeks that they were trying to figure out how they were going to fit into the life and the community of Columbus. You see, they had grown up in Tupelo, and that was the only church that they knew of. Even McGuire was baptized at the baptismal font there. And so they were trying to figure out, what does it mean when you're asked to leave that which is familiar and that which is safe? And so they began to ask questions, trying to make sense of Columbus based upon what they knew at Tupelo. And so Wright began to ask first by saying, do they have a children's choir? You'll be happy to know, Doug. I said, I have no idea. But I am sure that they do, to which we discovered that they did. Then Wright said, we're going to be able to play in the gym. Is that something that we're going to be able to do? Absolutely. You can play in the gym. Are we going to live right next to the church in the parsonage? And I said, well, the parsonage is in a different place, but we're going to live a little bit closer in Columbus than we do now. Well, then the conversation came to a little bit of a null, and we drove for a while. And then I heard Wright say from the back, well, I want to tell you one thing about Columbus. It sure does smell different. He said, and I like it. And I like it. What he was unable to articulate in his 8-year-old vocabulary was that he sensed that something was new. In fact, he literally smelled that this is a day of new beginnings. And anytime we are called to step out in faith, anytime we are called to leave that which is safe, which is secure, that we feel incredibly comfortable around, it is a scary thing. This morning in our text, we hear God specifically call out to Abram, leave, go to the country and to the land that I am going to show you. It oftentimes is believed by scholars that this isn't the first time that Abram heard the call of God. Because if we look back one chapter, at the end of chapter 11, we see that Abram's father, Terah, was encouraged by God to go to the land that God would show. For some reason, we do not know why, but Terah did not make it. In fact, became sidetracked in the land of Haran. It is so easy that as we seek to follow the ways of God, that we can become sidetracked. We can get comfortable. We can feel secure in what life is like around us. And when we hear God beckoning us to move, to dare to dream God's dream, it at times can be not only frightening, but overwhelming. Sometimes I wonder if we find such comfort, and out of fear, we decide not to move, and ultimately we miss God's blessings for our lives. I believe that when God calls us, He wants us to feast at the banquet that He has set for each and every one of us. Imagine with me, if you will, that it is Thanksgiving, and you have been working, slaving in the kitchen. You've got the house prepared and ready. You've got the family, the in-laws all coming over. Those from college come in. You've got the cousins playing with one another on the carpet. You have a spread that is fit for a king or a queen. The table's ornately decorated. You've got everything from ham to turkey to stuffing to dressing. It is fantastic. In fact, the feast that you prepared was with every single person in attendance in mind, fixing all of their favorite things. As you gather and hold hands, giving God thanks for that Thanksgiving feast, you look around at each of those faces that are present. And you say thanks to God for each of their lives. You say thanks to God for the gift that y'all are together as a family. You say thanks to God for the food. And as you pray and ask God's blessing upon all of it, as soon as you say amen, the younger kids dart out as fast as they can. They run down to the street, to the garbage can, and they begin stumbling, fumbling around, pulling all of the garbage out. Can you imagine if one of the kids grabbed a chicken bone, a leftover bone, and began to gnaw on it and said, "This is so good." And let's say the others were rummaging through and they found all the leftovers that had been thrown out in preparation to fill the refrigerator again. And they start eating and lavishing it up, saying, "This is excellent." You'd be mortified. You'd be mortified to the point, and you would be saying, "Stop, no, come back in. I have got so much more prepared for you. There's a feast, there's a banquet, there's a table, and there is a place for you at that table. Do not settle for the scraps, but come and partake in the feast that has been prepared." For some of us, when it comes to our spiritual life, we have settled for the spiritual scraps. And we have become so accustomed to the leftovers and to that which has been thrown aside that we've been feasting on that for such a long time that some of us think that we're full. Some of us think that we're satisfied. And I believe that God is beckoning each and every one of us that says, "No, stop. There is more in store for you. We've got a place for you at the table where you can feast and you can dine, and I specifically had you in mind when it was prepared." You see, the very first thing that Abram is called to is he is called to a place of rededication. He's called to complete the journey that for some reason or another his father didn't complete. And so he was called at that moment not only to rededicate, to say, "I'm no longer settling just for the scraps. No longer am I settling for that which is comfortable, but I'm stepping out in faithfulness to where it is that God is leading." And what he discovered is when you come to a place of rededication, living into God's dream for your own life, for us as a community of faith, it also means that we've got to relinquish. And what we see is that Abram was told to leave, was told to go, was told to get up and head on his way. And for some of us, we might think, that's a little bit harsh. Why is it that he has to get up in such a hurry? Why is it that he has to leave that which is comforting, that which he finds security in? Why is it? And if we look at the Hebrew word, it is leklika. And it specifically means to determinedly disassociate oneself from. What God is calling Abram to is that in the way that Abram has lived his life, he has put his trust in things and found his sense of security in things other than God. And so when he calls Abram to go forth to step out in faith, he's asking Abram to determinedly disassociate himself from those things so that he can put his faith in the faithful one. You see, anytime we are so bold to dare to dream God's dream, it's going to seem overwhelming. It's going to seem frightening. It's going to seem audacious and radical to step out in faith. But what we discover is that in putting our trust in God, we discover that God is faithful every step of the way. But it first called for Abram to relinquish those things that stood in his way from trusting God. There's a story about a little girl, and she was 4 years old. Her name was Susie. And she oftentimes would go over to her grandmother's house and play with her grandmother. They'd take care of her. And her grandmother traveled. She was known for her exotic travels all over the world. And every time she came back, she would bring a treasure. Well, she had been gone for quite some time, and when she returned, all the family gathered together to see what she had brought back. This was by far the best thing ever she had returned with, because she pulls out of her suitcase one of the most beautiful vases that anybody had ever seen. Susie looked at it, and she was enthralled with the color, enthralled with the shape and the design, and she wanted to look at it and play with it, but her grandmother had one of those rooms of all of the finest treasures, and there was a rule: no kids allowed. And just to make sure that no kids would touch this prized possession, she put it on the highest shelf in the no kids allowed room. Well, one day when Susie was playing, she wanted to see that vase. And so she entered into that room, and she began to climb up on all of the bookcases, and she carefully brought the vase down. She held it in her hands. She turned it over back and forth. She peered inside, and then she stuck her hand to see and feel what the inside felt like. When she went to pull it out, she realized that it was stuck. She couldn't get it out. And so she began to pull a little bit harder, and it didn't move at all. Then panic came over, and she began to cry out for her parents, and they ran in. And when her father saw what she had done, he too panicked. And he began pulling at her arm to the point that she's now crying because it's starting to hurt. They said, we need to get butter, we need to get Crisco, we need to get vegetable oil, whatever it could be to make it slippery. And then Susie's older sister came over and said, Susie, what is it that you have in your hand? And she said, a quarter. And she said, you need to let go of the quarter. And she said, no, I want the quarter. I want the quarter. She said, I realize that, Susie, but you need to let go of the quarter so that we can get you out of the situation that you're in. When it comes to your life, what have you been clutching onto so hard that God is inviting you to this morning to let go so that together you and God can get you out of the situation that you've been in? What is it that we, communally and corporately, as Christ's body, need to relinquish and let go as we seek to be faithful and to moving into the direction, daring to dream God's dream for our life? What is it that we need to leave behind so that we can get out of the situation that we're in? You see, not only was Abram called to rededicate his life to the mission and the purpose of God, and not only was he called to relinquish, but he was also called to receive the promises that God had in store. You see, we see in one verse that the word blessing is used 7 times. 7 times. When it comes to the Bible, the word 7 is known for completeness or wholeness. And it's as if that God is saying, Abram, when you step out, when you rededicate, when you relinquish, I want you to know that you are taking steps toward the ultimate sense of wholeness and completeness that is found in following me. You see, years ago, I was a junior in high school, and I grew up playing competitive tennis in Texas. And one afternoon, I was working out, and I was getting ready for a tournament, and I hit a serve, and I was serving and volleying, and I thought that my opponent was going to return the ball down the line, and she hit it cross court. And I remember planting, and when I planted, I heard a pop. And I immediately went down, clutching my knee, crying out. And after one doctor's opinion and then another doctor's opinion, we got an MRI, and it was determined that I had severed my anterior cruciate ligament. And so I was going to have reconstructive knee surgery. Well, we went through the process, and for the next several weeks, I laid in bed rehabbing. And I remember, and during that season of life, I would go and I would move, and life was happening fast and furious, and when this happened, it caused me to stop. And when it caused me to stop, I began to listen to the callings and the stirrings within my own spirit. You see, I was a Christian, but I was what you would consider or call a convenient Christian. If I wanted to do my own thing and it was in direct opposition with God's will or direction, I'd do it anyway. If I wanted to do something and it happened to be in line with God, well, that was great, because I was a convenient Christian, really serving and doing what I want when it came to my faith of convenience. And I laid in that bed, and I remember saying, God, I'm ready to get real with you. I'm ready to no longer give you lip service, but I'm ready to give you my life service. I'm ready to quit going through the motions. I'm ready to rededicate who I am. I'm ready to relinquish those things in my own life, because, God, I believe that you have a future for me that is far better than my wildest imagination. And so, personally, I wanted to dare to dream your dream and to step out faithfully. And by so doing, receive tremendous blessings, like being able to be with you, the people of First Church Columbus. We see that when Abram steps out, God promises blessings upon him. So much so that we see, he says, I will make you a great nation. I will bless you. I will make your name great. You will be a blessing. I will bless those who bless you. I will curse those who curse you. And all the people on earth shall be blessed through you. Now, one thing to note is that the one who is doing the blessing isn't Abram, but it's God. It's God bestowing blessings upon a faithful servant who was so audacious to listen and to heed God's call and promise to live into his life. The interesting thing is that Abram isn't going to see all of these promises fulfilled. But what we discover is how he chooses, what it is that he decides in that place and in that time will affect the course of human history forever. I believe that God is calling us to dare to dream some incredible dreams, church family. And over the past couple of weeks, I have met with many of you, and I have listened to what you believe that God is calling us to. How it is that we're to be surrendered in prayer, how it is that we're to come together and unite as Christ's body, and how it is that we are to step out in faith with one another, rededicating ourselves to the purposes and the calling of God as Christ's body, relinquishing and letting go of those things that we've placed and put our trust in, and turn our trust to the very heart of God, and prepare ourselves to be open to receive the blessings of what God calls us to be. Now, the interesting thing is that for some of us, we may not see all of God's blessings unfold. But how we choose to respond in the here and in the now, in this place, I believe will affect the course of history here in this church and throughout this community. I took a group of youth when I was a youth minister to a Navajo Indian reservation to do some mission work. And we had been on the reservation serving and fixing up houses, and we got finished one day a little bit early. And so we heard that there was an outdoor market where those of Native Americans would come and sell that which their arts and their crafts. And so I said, let's go there. And so the kids took off, and they were searching and having a good time. And I was walking around the market looking, taking in all the artwork. And I remember I saw a woman weaving. And as I watched her, I thought, it looks horrible. I thought her work is awful. I thought the colors she used are I'd choose different colors. I thought the pattern, what even pattern is that? Who's going to buy that? I would do that different. I would change that up. And then as I kept walking, I turned back and I realized that I was looking at the back of it. And when I came to the other side, it was the most beautiful, exquisite piece of art that I had ever encountered. There's a temptation for us as Christ's body to say, I would do that different. I'd use a different color there. Well, that's wrong. I'd make sure that, that is just flat out ugly. That's awful. And if we hang on long enough, church family, we're going to get far enough down this road and this journey, and we're going to turn back. And we're going to see that God has woven your life and your life and your life and mine into one of the most beautiful works of art that we could have ever been a part of. But it requires of us to be about God's purpose in this place. It requires of us to let go and to let God be ruler of your life and mine. And it requires of us to position ourselves faithfully, to dare to dream God's dream as we seek to be a light to the nations in this community and throughout this world. And so I invite you to step faithfully with me into the future where God only dares that we go. And may we do so of one body, of one heart, and of one mind. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit. And God's followers said, Amen.